Hi everyone, this is Ashima Gupta. I'm founder of Sourcing Acumen, an AI native procurement platform. As part of procurement leadership discussion, today I'm joined by Armin. He is one of the well known and deep experts in the field of sourcing optimization and game theory. Armin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Namaste, Ashima, and very welcome to everyone else here listening to that. It's a pleasure being with you, Ashima, today.
Oh, wonderful. I mean, you are in this space for more than 2 decades, right? And you have seen sourcing optimization, game theory from all of the angles as a consultant from a technology side and also being in the industry itself. I don't know. There are very few people in the world, right, who can actually create a clear distinction between sourcing optimization and game theory as much as you can do, right? So, very, very excited to hear your practical experiences, your thoughts around it. Uh, and once again, like, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you. This is indeed when you recognize that you're getting old, when you can say not only that I have 25 plus years of experience, but that you have actually been 25 years plus in this very field.
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard to find a profile similar to you where people have so much expertise into game theory. Like sourcing optimization is still there, and people use interchangeably these words, but game theory, I think it's the next level.
I think it is a combination of both, and therefore I wouldn't say you should do one without the other. It's actually a combination that is needed. Having been a strategy consultant for a very long time, it won't surprise you that I'm thinking about certain levels of sophistication that an organization is applying when they're doing sourcing, and it starts on the base level where they are doing regular tenders with cost modeling and market research, and that's all good. The next level was then to use, where appropriate, where it's neither single sourcing nor cherry picking, and you have a significant spend to award, that you started using optimization for better outcome, for better analysis. But the journey really doesn't stop there. I would actually say that then you have an even better approach if you do at least a game theory optimized approach at the final round of the negotiations, and I will come to that in a moment. But the really optimal approach, in my opinion, is when you integrate game theory right from the beginning into the overall process. It starts actually with thinking about, should I go to market or not? And if so, with what scope should I go to market? Should I go with a regional approach, with a country-wise approach, a global approach? The next question, which is a very strategic question, and many buyers are not thinking carefully enough about before they simply go into action, is who should I really invite, and who should I negotiate with? That the very first game theory project that I actually had the pleasure to observe many years ago was a project where the game theory experts told me, you know what, we shouldn't invite all the regional and local suppliers in that particular category. I was coming from a school where I was thinking having more suppliers means more comparability, better insight. And he said that is not necessarily always the case, that it's really playing to your advantage. And he advised me to only negotiate with the two heavyweights in that category at the time. And it worked out perfectly. And it's a good example where integrating game theoretic thinking right from the beginning is really giving you an advantage. And it doesn't stop there at the very beginning. It continues when you think about how should you really design your bid sheets. What is the information you should share with the suppliers? What is the information that you should collect from the suppliers, not only for the regular bids, but in particular, one of the nice features of sourcing optimization is that we can leverage expressive bids. We can ask for alternatives. We can ask for volume bundle discounts, capacities, on cost, etc. But you shouldn't always do it. And that's the point. Just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you always should. And this is where this strategic thinking really comes in. It continues throughout the process when it's about what is the right feedback that I should actually give to the suppliers between the bid rounds. And obviously then for the final round, how should I design the final negotiation before I make the award? There, for obvious reasons, is the biggest implication and the biggest difference between a regular tendering approach, where you typically have prepared as procurement a very comprehensive analysis. These are all the million options that we have, and then you have a steering committee with all the business partners, and behind closed doors they somehow come to a decision who should now win what, which is understandable why many organizations are doing that way, but it is not the optimal way to actually really make the suppliers go to the very core of what they are willing to do. This is what you only accomplish with a game theoretical approach, and that, in all simplification, is actually designed with a front-loaded process where you are having these discussions with all the decision makers or the business partners before you go into the final round, in order to really make the bids from the suppliers comparable after all the analysis, all the scenarios that you have calculated, that gave them the transparency, what is really the cost of going that way or that way, and then to really fixate this into a bonus penalty scheme and go into a final round where you have a negotiation design. In game theory, we typically call it an auction, and that is something that might scare people a little bit because they always think about an online auction. That is a possibility, but it's only one of many alternatives that you can actually design the final round in. But the fundamental concept is that in the final round, in a game theoretic optimized approach, you're trying not to negotiate yourself with the suppliers any longer, so that they need to trust what you're telling them, but you actually try to create a mechanism pre-agreed and fully committed with the business partners that allow that suppliers are really competing against each other. That is what then drives better results than in a regular tendering approach, whether it is with optimization earlier or without.
It's a common myth, right? Like that more suppliers, as you mentioned, more suppliers, better is the outcome. And that's how we try to, invite a lot of suppliers in, especially larger tenders. Maybe share one practical example, Armin, where you feel like having lesser supplier is actually beneficial. What situation would that be?
It was, I think the best example is really this very project that I mentioned earlier. The very first game theoretic project that I did, I was in a strategy consulting firm with a very high reputation for advanced sourcing and procurement. So not really in doubt that everything that we had done earlier to that was not already seen and perceived by ourselves as being best practice. And still, it was a category where it was dominated by one supplier. There we actually then got the idea from the game theory experts only to negotiate with them and their only credible global competitor, and leaving all the regional and local alternatives outside. We provided both of them with utmost transparency about our demand over several weeks' time. And what really the magic was, that is what we agreed with the business to run the process in a very different way. Instead of negotiating with them in parallel, we actually invited them at the same day to the same location. So they were sitting next to each other in the morning. That is something that I had done in the past before, so that they would feel that there's a competition. But that was not the trick alone. The real magic happened when we told them how this day would be conducted, where we told them, you know what? We have here a sealed envelope with signatures of all the business partners on it, in which you will find a committed offer from ourselves. If you are the one opening this envelope and you find it acceptable what is in there, the day is over. The others won't even see what was in there. Only if you say this is not possible, fair enough, all fine, but then the envelope would be passed on to the other one. And if they agree the day is over, only if both of you after each other would tell us this is unacceptable, then we would have a normal negotiation. We gave them 90 minutes time in 2 separate rooms, and told them that in 90 minutes we would pick them up, and we had big check forms prepared in these rooms with board marker, and told them in 90 minutes there should be a number on these forms representing the sign-on bonus they would be willing to give to us if a deal materializes. No deal, it doesn't cost them anything. But if there's a deal, that is the savings we would like to have on day one. Now, on the 50 million per year spent, 3-year duration, so 150 million revenues. One of the suppliers offered 6 million, the other offered 10 million. So they were the ones allowed to have a first sneak into the envelope. They struggled, of course, a little bit because there were further savings that we had articulated in it, but they also recognized that we had not overdone it. So while it was painful for them to accept the deal, it was not so painful that it would have been impossible. And because of the mechanism, it was clear to them that there was a significant risk. If they are not making the deal, the others might make it, because if it is uncomfortable but not impossible for you, and you know that the sign-on bonus of the others is lower than yours, their pain is lower. And therefore, they came to the only logical conclusion in this wonderful prisoner dilemma that we had created, that it is better to accept the deal than to risk anything. And this is how we created more than double-digit savings with a supplier who had never given anywhere else, where all of my colleagues had sourced them in the years before, ever more than 3%.
Yeah. Now imagine, right? Like we are all just going digital, and how you create this magic.
And the point is, it doesn't require always digital solutions. We use digital a lot, of course. But the fundamental concept in game theory really is that you're trying to create a prisoner's dilemma so that it is clear for them and transparent for them what the consequences are of their actions. And it was fully transparent. It was absolutely fair. Both of them had absolutely the same chances to win. We had not influenced anything to anyone's advantage. The real magic was that we had been able to get commitment from the business to accept the outcome of that day without any further ask, without any further negotiations afterwards.
I think like that should be needed. Like otherwise, the negotiation never stops.
And this is exactly where the difference is between a regular sourcing optimization project, where many times you have that ongoing process back and forth between procurement, the suppliers, and the decision makers, until then someday someone is in the behind closed doors making a decision. Where here we are really introducing a negotiation approach in the final round, a negotiation design that then really determines in a committed way the winner or the winners. Have a very poor reputation in the market, and that for a reason. And the reason is, as we discussed in the very beginning, I've been around in the procurement space a little longer, and in the early 2000s, auctions were a big thing and everyone was doing auctions. That also means that a lot, and if not to say the majority of auctions, were done in a bitterly poor manner. I've seen so many auctions where there was no commitment, where the buyer ran an auction in order to get some price indications, but reserved themselves the right to review the outcome before they would communicate the final award. And if you're doing this, you're destroying the entire logic and the entire foundation of what an auction is all about. An auction is only good if it is fair, transparent, and committed.
If you I've been in a situation
that way, then it is a very sharp word to really motivate people to go up to the point where they better should say no. And we in the professional environment, we are explicitly avoiding auctions where we want to put suppliers into too much time pressure. We don't want them to do any irrational decisions. Game theory is all about rational decision making, because we don't want to create a situation where someone is agreeing to a deal that gives them headache later on, because these headaches will be passed on to the buying organization in one way or the other. And this is why providing them with utmost information about your demands, not on terms only of volumes, but all the specifications and needs prior to the auction, is really essential.
I've seen the situation like supplier would refuse to participate because they say that it's only for price discovery and buyer is only going to still end up with the incumbent supplier, so we would rather not participate. Definitely seen that. So in order to maintain the reputation that you're actually going to award, you have to award. right? So they need to see that you actually award, not that you are just committing that we will award.
And in order to become able to communicate that you're willing to awards, it needs that you have to have done your homework properly before you go into the auction. And this is where most of the buyers have, or many, let me phrase it a little bit more politely, many buyers have done shortcuts which either then felt on their toes, or that created these hassle afterwards. And this is where you can really distinguish a proper auction from a poor auction.
You have to walk into a Fortune 500 company, and you have to change the way how they design sourcing events. What's one key thing you would like to suggest so that will derive like most significant value?
That's a very good question. And I would actually start on an even higher level before we are talking about sourcing optimization as such. What I see in a lot, if not almost all organizations, is a misincentivization of buyers. And if I would be CPO, or even better CFO or CEO, that is where I would really start putting some things together in a different way. What I mean by that is the following. If you are a buyer, let's say you're a buyer for packaging, and you know that if you are bringing every year your 1, 2, 3% in savings, everyone would applaud you and will give you kudos, and everyone is happy, and you're getting your bonus, and everything is fine. You probably have a very nice life for a number of years because you have a no noise, all targets accomplished life. If you are doing the full Monty and you bring 15% this year, first thing that is going to happen is people will ask, oops, why haven't we got these 15% any earlier? The second thing is that they will not give you double your bonus, even if you have all of a sudden created the organization millions in additional savings that no one was expecting. You personally have no real advantage. The third thing that is very likely to happen is that the organization is expecting you to bring another 15% next year. And is increasing your objectives. And for obvious reasons, if you have done everything very properly this year, the cream is off the milk, and therefore there is not another 15% that you can create next year. So you're really hurting yourself if you're doing more than what you're expected to deliver. So answering your question, what I would do in an organization if I would have really control over what people are doing in procurement and beyond, I would think about using game theory in the internal game. How do I incentivize people to do more than just the minimum and the noise avoidance?
This keeps coming up, like, salespeople, they get incentivized when they do more sale, but is procurement getting incentivized then when they deliver more? Both are bringing a lot of value to the organization.
Absolutely. And I would be perfectly fine to create a system where you are measuring the real impact that procurement has delivered over a longer period of time, simply for the reason that we all know that procurement, in particular when consultants are involved, have been quite smart to report value which not always materialized the months and years later. So I think it would be perfectly fine to have a system established where you're measuring over a longer period of time, was it really the right way of doing things? And I also would be perfectly fine not to pay out all the bonus at once, but over a certain period of time. But the main point is there should be an incentive for people to do everything that is good for the organization and not just good for themselves.
And if they have to get 15% saving, it's not just going to come like, off the price. They have to do a lot of effort in stakeholder alignment, taking the, difficult decisions, and then even going to the production, engineering, operations, and getting everything implemented. So getting those bigger numbers is not so easy. It's not just price negotiations.
Typically, you see procurement adopting both optimization and game theory in two and only two situations. Either you have a super intrinsically motivated buyer or category manager who is keen on doing whatever is possible and really would like to build up this competence and this expertise and use innovative ways to accomplish success. Or if the organization or the buyer or the category is in trouble and is lacking significantly compared to the targets that they have received. But if you are a buyer, if you're a category manager and you see yourself being well on track compared to the very often very moderate targets that these people have, it would be dumb, and I fully understand, I'm not blaming them at all, to do more than what is necessary and have issues in the coming years.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. And moving on, many procurement teams spend weeks in building hundred of constraints when they are running sourcing events and they are building their optimization model. In your experience, which constraints genuinely improve the business outcome and which ones are simply making organization feel safer while they may be actually destroying the value?
Also a very good question, Ashima. Now, let me start with something that I only learned myself a few years ago, which I call the dual sourcing paradoxon. What I mean by that is that very often you have clients with a very distinct strategy. They want to reduce risk, and this is why they want to have dual sourcing on almost every item or within a certain category. And as understandable as that is, only after having talked to an economist, I actually learned that while the size of an incident obviously is smaller if you have two suppliers, and if one of them fails, you have less of a problem, the probability that something happens increases. So dual sourcing is not necessarily really safer. It might be that you have more problems to fix, which are smaller in magnitude, and this is why you should actually have a clearer understanding and strategy behind it. And this is where game theory, which is part of economists' work, our economists are actually doing a much more precise modeling. What is really the best strategy that you should apply, instead of just dumping these business constraints on a scenario and trying to make the best out of it. We are really challenging, is this a smart business constraint that you are asking for here? And the way how I personally do it in all the more than hundreds large sourcing optimization projects that I have personally conducted over the years is that I created something that I call the scenario cycle.
Okay.
What I mean by that is, instead of collecting a long list of wishes from all the business partners and throw them on the scenario and find out what is the best based on all these business constraints, I am starting with an unconstrained scenario. I'm comparing it with an as-is scenario, means no alternative bids, no supplier changes on item level, the very precise same allocation as we had it in the past, and see what is really the delta between those both. In order to see a little bit the bandwidth, one is obviously, or not necessarily, but very likely not really implementable, the unconstrained one. The other one is likely very safe to implement, not always welcome, because there can be situations where this existing suppliers were not really the favorite ones from the buyers, but in theory it is the safest one. And what you
kind of get out, like a roof and floor, and then you iterate between those guys.
Exactly. While the unconstrained really is the floor, the as-is not necessarily the absolute roof, because you can easily build a constraint that makes the cost even higher than the as-is allocation. But it is, from an implementability, the easiest one, because nothing would change with the allocation. Now, what I then do in this scenario cycle is that I use the unconstrained scenario and I start looking into the scenario together with the client. What is really an issue with that allocation that we're seeing here at the moment? And if we find a problem, if we find an issue, I create a copy of the scenario and add the business constraint or business constraints that address the very problem that we have identified, one at a time. I optimize it, I compare these both scenarios, I find out what is the cost of having fixed the problem that we have seen. Is that cost acceptable? If yes, we continue and look for other issues. If the cost is very high, we still might have an issue and therefore might think about how to change the constraints in a way that we are modifying it in order to accomplish the same or somewhat same business value at lower cost implication. And go through that cycle by cycle until you do not find any problems with the scenario any longer. And this then typically is your finest scenario, and doing it that way avoids you from having to run hundreds of scenarios with thousands of business constraints that someone has articulated, because you are really starting looking at what are the main problems first, and a lot of the smaller problems disappearing automatically when you have fixed the big problems already earlier. And this is why the scenario cycle is a highly recommended way to do an efficient way of scenario analytics. These tools are very often under-leveraged by organizations because they are so capable. You can do so many things. You can do so many things with expressive billing, with feedback, with scenario analytics, that for people who are not using it day after day after day, but only maybe once a year or every second year, they are very understandable, confused and overwhelmed, and they are starting to miss the forest because of all the trees. And this is why I very truly believe that the best way of leveraging these tools, both in optimization and in game theory, it's actually the same thing, is to have someone at your side as a sparring partner. Someone who has that deep knowledge and is asking you the right questions throughout the different stages of the project, so that you can really leverage these methods in the best and most optimal way.
No, I agree with you. Like, it is a science in itself. Knowing that which constraints might deliver you best results and how quickly to get there uh, is is an art in itself. So, for example, like,
It is
if
an
I,
art. I like that. Yeah, absolutely right. And but the point is, you don't necessarily need to have someone who is putting every single brush stroke on the canvas for you, and you're just sitting next to him and then see how the picture develops. You can do a lot of the painting yourself, but you should have someone at the right moment throughout the project with you who is asking you the right questions, so that you can really rethink, am I on the right track, in order to make it a nice picture and not just a picture.
I think, like, it is also expertise how you quickly get there. Like, you can keep building lot of constraint. For example, like, as you said, we start with the best of best, which will give you the lowest cost but most saving, defines your floor, and you get the as is incumbent, which will give you the most cost, and that will be the roof. Now, in between those two, before you do anything, if you just allow only your network incumbents to bid on anything and remove even your all the new suppliers, you will certainly land somewhere in between, right? So at
Absolutely
least
right. I typically
50% of the delta
distinguish.
will be gone with the network incumbent suppliers, and then maybe you start optimizing further, that I want x number of winners only, right? You don't want a long tail of suppliers to win. You put in some of the regional preferences as well, but there is a layer how you will keep adding those constraints versus start from totally a new constraint of regional preferences. We need to layer it out in a certain fashion.
Absolutely. This is why I typically distinguish three different levels of incumbency. So I'm comparing with some of the more generic scenarios. What would happen if we allocate precisely as we had it in the past, with the same shares per item as we had them in the past? And I compare this, what would happen if only someone who has delivered on this very item before, but they still could win the entire item. It doesn't have to be a share any longer, as long as capacity is available, etc. Comparing it, what would happen if we have someone winning who has at least provided something in the very same subcategory or on that very site, so that he is known to the people on that in that factory, on that plant, compared with someone who has at least giving business to us somewhere before, so that you have really these different levels of incumbency, because obviously it makes the convincing the business partners much easier if they don't have to implement a complete new supplier. But if you then find out what the cost difference is, and you can really put a precise price point next to it. This is what I love with optimization. The optimization is really changing these discussions that you're having with the business partners, from I as an expert are telling you you should do it this and that way because based on my experience this is how you should do things, towards here is what your business constraints would result into, and a precise impact down to the Swiss franc, down to the dollar, down to the euro. Is that money that you're really willing to spend? Now, to be honest, for the optimization freaks among us, that number is not an absolute fixed number, because depending on the sequence with which you're adding constraints in a scenario, the implication can be different. But that is a simplification I think everyone can live with. And this is why the scenario cycle is so good, that you're really starting what are the most obvious issues that you want to fix before you go into the more detailed ones.
It's a fear of unknown, right? And what cost you are willing to pay for that fear, right? So where do you settle? Are you okay with the totally new one, or you're okay with the one who has done the category, or you're only okay with the one who has done the same lane, right?
And this is what I mentioned earlier in the game theory approach, where we seek for this commitment prior to the final rounds. It's the most underestimated challenge for us and for the client to really get to that commitment, because it means that you have to make very different suppliers, very different offers comparable. How? By really finding out what is a fair price tag that we want to put on things that doesn't have a price. And that's the interesting. That's what we call the bonus penalty discussions and the who can win what discussion. So the who can win what is really about where there are complete no-goes, but the bonus penalty is about if someone says I don't want to switch, we are asking, I can fully understand you don't want to switch for 10 euros. I fully can understand that you don't want to switch for 100 euros, for 1,000 euros. If it is a million, if it is 10 million, would you still think you don't want to switch?
And you will see that people will engage. Like when you put a price tag to it of their decision, they will engage and they'll say that, oh, I never knew that it's going to be so expensive, the preferences we are making. And you will certainly get a buy-in from the business.
And this is why the combination of optimization and game theory is so fascinating, because it allows you to bring in that input into this discussion based on actual bits, based on what the market is already telling you from the bits that you have collected so far, so that you have a much more comprehensive discussion with the business partners about their options before you go into the final round with a more precisely determined bonus penalty scheme.
Very nice. I mean, I'm pretty sure we can talk for another 1 hour on this topic.
Absolutely.
But for today, thank you so much for joining us. It was very fascinating. All of the examples you shared, they are so practical. It's a huge learning for me as well. So I really appreciate you made time for me. It's a big win for me.
It was truly a pleasure, and I think you recognized already that I'm doing this not only because it is my profession, but I'm doing it out of passion. That's the reason why I have been doing it for such a long time, and that's also the reason why we are now helping clients not only doing that the first time right, but doing it on a continuous way right, because we can actually support in that coaching manner that I was not able to offer in my previous firms. that is where you then really can then help people to get the most out of very sophisticated methods without necessarily having to make every single buyer an optimization and game theory super guru themselves. There's so much that we are asking these people to do. We are asking them to be category experts, to know all the suppliers, to be great relationship managers, to be great analysts in terms of cost modeling and Excel and you name it. And doing on top of that also becoming experts in optimization and game theory is quite an ask. And this is why, in my opinion, the best governance model is to give these people the additional support at the time when it's needed. And this is what I think you and myself think is the best way of making it happen in these organizations.
Absolutely. And people have now so much excitement to learn AI as well. So we need to create a space for them.
AI is a good point because AI definitely is making these tools more accessible than in the past. In the past, people would have read through the hundreds or thousands of pages of documentation, which understandably rarely people were doing. AI is now able to help you if you to configure the solution in the way you want it. But the main point here is AI is not helping you to ask the right questions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It is not help when you tell the AI, can you please design a project for me that should have 3 phases and it should have that cost model. That's all good that it's doing that. You don't necessarily need to be a tool expert for that any longer, but it doesn't tell you whether the fundamental strategic consideration are right or wrong.
That still should stay human. Like even at sourcing Acumen, right? I'm very excited that when I was doing sourcing optimization, we would go build the rules manually and we had to learn technicalities of the tool. But like, everybody has progressed. Now we are in a world
Yeah.
where scenario optimization, you just tell in a plain human language that I want these constraints to be added, and AI will build the rules for you. So you don't need to be the technical expert on the tool, but you rather need to still know what is my strategy, is my strategy correct or not. So spend time there. So for sure AI, I think, has done a good job of taking the work out of the people played that was tedious before. So
Yeah.
I do see like a really positive
It is
contribution that.
lowering the
Sure.
barrier, and this is what makes me hopeful that the adoption will further increase.
Hmm.
But it
Absolutely.
is not the final answer to the underlying problem that most organizations have been facing in the recent years, leveraging these solutions to the full extent what they are capable of.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, even in the simpler categories, I do see that people want to use sourcing optimization and they're very excited that, okay, we made it simpler for them. So, no, happy. Wonderful.